everyone, I'm Dr. Rebecca Starr from the Linguistics program at NUS, and I'm so happy to be here to talk to you today about our graduate program and to tell you a little bit about my research on language variation and change in Singapore. First, I'll be talking about our graduate studies program in English language and linguistics, and then I'll introduce my main area of research, language variation and change, and I'll talk a bit about some of the current issues in research on Singapore English. I'm going to go over one of the research projects I've completed on variation in Singapore English and some of the implications of that research. And then briefly, a bit about Singapore Mandarin, since that's one of the other areas I've been working on as well. The linguistics program at NUS is considered one of the top linguistics programs in the world and is home to a diverse community of faculty and students working on a wide range of research questions. Here are some of us a few years ago, before the pandemic, presenting at the Sociolinguistics Symposium in New Zealand. First, I wanted to clarify where you can study linguistics at NUS. Our department is called English Language and Literature, and it houses three distinct programs: English Literature, English Language, and Theater Studies. So it's within the English Language program that you can apply for a PhD in English Language and Linguistics. Our linguistics program is unusual among the top linguistics programs internationally in the wide range of areas that it covers. We have faculty specializing in areas of formal linguistics, language documentation and revitalization, language policy, language and media, language and gender, language variation and change, linguistic landscapes, and psycholinguistics. Another important point that I wanted to emphasize about our program: although we are technically the English language program, we are a linguistics program, and we study language in general. This means that the faculty engage in many research projects that do not focus on English, and we are happy to supervise student research focusing on any language. Faculty in our program have supervised student projects on Korean, Mandarin, Japanese, and many more languages. I know a lot of students thinking about applying to NUS are wondering whether to apply for a program in Singapore or somewhere else in the world. From my perspective, Singapore is a fantastic place to work on linguistics because it has a long and distinguished history of research on linguistics and multilingualism. There's a strong community of researchers working in a wide range of areas, and quite simply, it's one of the most fun and interesting places in the world to study language. Okay, so I'm done with the plugs for our program, and now I'm going to talk a bit about my own work. I work on probably too many things, and some of those things are listed here: children's sociolinguistic development in multilingual environments, language variation and change in a number of languages, and the sociophonetic construction of style. Today I'll be focusing on my work on language variation and change. This is one of the major research traditions within sociolinguistics, which refers very broadly to the study of language and society. In variationist sociolinguistics, we focus on patterns of language use in communities and how those patterns change over time. One of the great things about this tradition is that it integrates quantitative and qualitative methodologies. So there's acoustic analysis, statistical analysis, and then qualitative analysis as well, which means endless things to learn about, and an interdisciplinary focus that allows you to explore different academic traditions. Today I'll be talking about language variation in Singapore, so let's briefly review the linguistic situation here. Singapore has 4 official languages: English, Mandarin, Malay, and Tamil, and the country has seen several major linguistic shifts over the course of the past few decades. First, there has been a dramatic shift from Southern Chinese varieties, meaning Hokkien, Cantonese, and other so-called dialects, to Mandarin, in the Chinese majority population. Second, there's been a dramatic rise in English, so that English is now not only the language of school and work, but has recently become the most commonly spoken home language. In Cottrew's well-known 3 circles model of world Englishes, Singapore has historically been placed in the outer circle, because in the past, English was widely used institutionally, but was not frequently spoken as a first language in the home. This is in contrast to the inner circle, places like the US and UK, where English is spoken natively. Today, the situation in Singapore is very different, with the majority of children acquiring English as a first language at home. So in this sense, Singapore arguably no longer fits into the outer circle. However, my colleagues at NUS, Joseph Park and Lionel Wee, argue that Singapore English is still ideologically positioned as an outer circle variety. In other words, although Singapore English is technically learned as a first language, this fact has not eradicated certain ideologies surrounding the variety, which is still perceived as lacking in legitimacy as a so-called native variety among both locals and outsiders. What I find in my own research is this perception is in the process of changing, but things are still very much in flux. My approach to Singapore English is also crucially informed by Schneider's dynamic model of post-colonial Englishes, which places Singapore in the phase of endonormative stabilization, meaning that norms are in the process of shifting from external, meaning focused on inner circle varieties, most particularly the UK, to internal, meaning oriented towards local norms for English. As I find in my work, this ongoing shift means that individuals in the community may hold very different attitudes regarding sociolinguistic norms and whether local linguistic features are appropriate in various contexts. As I mentioned earlier, Singapore has a long tradition of linguistic scholarship, and as a result, there have been many models proposed for Singapore English. The earliest model accounting for variation in Singapore English was a lectal continuum model, equivalent to the post-Creole continuum, with the acrolectal or most standard variety being standard Singapore English, and the basilectal or least standard variety being colloquial Singapore English, or Singlish, which is a contact variety that is argued by some to be a Creole or a Creoloid, and argued by others to just vaguely be a contact variety. But whatever Singlish is, it has primarily Malay and Southern Chinese substrates, meaning that these other languages have influenced its underlying structure. A more recent model for Singapore English is Alsagoff's cultural orientation model, in which standard features are argued to index a global orientation and colloquial features a local orientation. Recently, both Jakob Leimgruber and myself have argued that the shortcomings in existing models call for a shift towards a variationist approach to Singapore English, focusing on how particular features index a range of potential social meanings. In particular, I argue that this shift is needed because the sociolinguistic situation in Singapore has moved beyond the point where we can maintain a single continuum that ranges from standard to colloquial and/or global to local. Research on variation and change in Singapore English, including my own work, identifies two major parallel shifts that are proposed to be taking place in the variety. First, a shift towards U.S. English norms. This applies fairly uncontroversially to the lexicon, meaning vocabulary, which parallels a global shift towards American vocabulary and spelling, but it may also apply to phonological features, meaning pronunciation. Most notably, researchers argue that rising post-vocalic rhoticity is a case of Americanization in Singapore English. The second shift refers to rising endonormativity, as proposed by Schneider in his dynamic model. With these two shifts occurring in parallel, questions arise as to how exactly they interact and what happens when they conflict. Here are some major research questions relating to Singapore English that I've been working on over the past few years. First, is media consumption and rising mobility changing how Singaporeans speak English and/or what they know about other varieties of English? Second, how do children growing up in Singapore develop their understanding of the social significance of the diverse varieties present in the community? Third, are attitudes towards features of Singapore English shifting among younger generations? And finally, are different ethnic groups in Singapore speaking English more similarly over time? Well, I could talk about all these research questions for hours, but today I'll just present one of my studies related to Singapore English. This is a 2019 study focusing on the distinction between the vowels in the Bath class of words and the Trap class of words. Now you'll notice that I pronounce both of these words with the same vowel, and we'll get to why that is in just a second. Actually, all English speakers used to pronounce Bath and Trap in the same way, but in the 18th century, speakers in southern England began to pronounce Bath words with an ah sound, as in bath, while Trap words retained the ah sound, as in trap. This is a change that slowly spread outward to some regions of England and its colonies, but not to others, and it spread for some words and not for others. So as a result of this change and its diffusion to other communities, there's a lot of variation in the use of this split within the UK and elsewhere in the English-speaking world. Because the US was colonized well before this split took place, though, these two classes are merged in the US, which is why I say Bath and Trap the same way. To give us an idea of the complexity of this variation, John Wells, in his work on dialects of English, identifies 5 relevant classes of words. First, there are trap class words like bat and map that are pronounced with a everywhere. Then there are 4 classes of Bath words. Of these, the final one, Bath D, is variably pronounced with an ah or an a in RP, meaning received pronunciation. This is considered the standard, prestigious variety of English in the UK. So Bath through A and C are pronounced ah in RP. But in Northern England, only Bath C, words like half, are pronounced half. Whereas in Australia, words with a nasal consonant in Bath B, as in dance and hand, are also pronounced with an a. So some sneaky ways here of detecting where someone is from based on how they say different words. Now back to Singapore English. Singapore English is traditionally described as having a bath trap distinction that mirrors that of RP, meaning the same as standard British English. But given the proposed trend of Americanization in Singapore English, we might wonder whether this is still the case, and we might also wonder whether watching US media or traveling to the US might have any impact on Singaporeans' pronunciation of bath and trap words. The 2 questions I ask in this study are, do media consumption and travel experience shape Singaporeans' realization of the bath and trap lexical sets? And then, do these factors play a role in Singaporeans' knowledge of how these lexical sets are realized in the UK and US? This was a survey in which respondents reported for 23 words in the bath and trap lexical classes how they pronounced the word personally, how they believed it was pronounced in London, and how they believed it was pronounced in California. And respondents also indicated their media viewing habits, how often they watched US and UK media, and travel experience, where they had been overseas and for how long. Here are the overall results for self-report for the 23 items, divided by frequency of US media consumption. Longer bars here indicate more a pronunciation, and shorter bars more ah pronunciation. At the top, we have the trap class, which we expect to have long bars, and it does. In the middle, we have a few variable bath words as identified by Wells, and then at the bottom are the regular bath words. So overall, we can see that there's no wholesale shift towards American English norms in Singapore English, because if that were the case, we would expect to be seeing much longer bars across the graph here. But we do see a pattern in which those who frequently watch US media in the dark blue bars have slightly higher a frequency for bath words. And indeed, this effect is significant in the statistical model. Frequent consumption of US media correlates with greater report of a for bath. However, this analysis finds no significant effects for overseas travel or for UK media consumption. For knowledge of the bath trap distinction in London, there is a significant effect for UK media consumption, with frequent consumers producing more accurate responses for bath class words. And a similarly significant effect for travel to the UK, with those who have stayed in the UK for more than a month producing significantly more accurate bath responses. However, for knowledge of US English, we have an unexpected effect. There is a highly significant effect here for UK media consumption, so that respondents who frequently watch UK media are more accurate in their knowledge of the bath trap merger in US English. Indeed, the US media effect is so large that it swamps the smaller US media effect and leaves the travel to the US and Canada effect at only marginal significance. Another thing that's quite striking about the California task, in which respondents were asked to report their knowledge of how bath and trap words are pronounced in US English, is overall poor performance on this task. Although 92% of respondents said that they watch US media at least occasionally, only 12.4% of respondents showed an awareness that US English features a bath trap merger. Of course, whether performance on this task would be different among participants in the UK or another country, we don't know. But this does seem like remarkably poor explicit knowledge of what should be a fairly simple phonological merger of 2 vowel classes. Alright, so to summarize what I found in this analysis, the significant effects of US media consumption were limited to personal pronunciation, while UK media consumption predicted both knowledge of UK and US pronunciation. Travel to the UK did improve knowledge of UK pronunciation, and travel to the US and Canada marginally predicted knowledge of US pronunciation. This unexpected effect of UK media consumption on knowledge of US pronunciation reflects some of the challenges inherent in trying to propose a causal link between media consumption and sociolinguistic knowledge. Consuming UK media in itself does not improve knowledge of US English. We know that. So there's likely to be some mediating factor here. Given the time period in which this questionnaire was distributed and the UK shows that were popular at that time, like Sherlock and Doctor Who, it's possible that viewers of UK media are more likely to be high engagement viewers with a greater Western orientation, hence their stronger performance on the task. In terms of Americanization, we find that Singaporeans are largely maintaining a conservative backtrap distinction. There's no large-scale adoption of US English pronunciation here. Nonetheless, there is a small but significant effect here of frequent consumption of US media and greater use of US English pronunciation for Bath. As for why we don't see Americanization in this case, this could be a functional load issue. Singapore English already has a dress trap merger, and adding a bath trap merger on top of that, it's a lot of mergers. Alright, so that was one study in my work on the impact of media consumption, which I'm continuing to work on using different methodologies. In terms of other future directions for my work on Singapore English, these include investigating the impacts of ethnicity and social class on variation and change, looking at the acquisition of Singapore English among newcomers to Singapore, expanded sociophonetic analysis of the sound system of Singapore English, and exploring the rising commodification of Singlish, the colloquial variety. I also wanted to talk at least a bit about Singapore Mandarin today, because about half of my work is actually on Mandarin, and there are some interesting parallels between Singapore Mandarin and English. Mandarin in Singapore has a similar outer circle status and is perceived as lacking legitimacy because it was historically introduced as an L2 and primarily learned in schools. It experiences a similar tension between external and internal norms, with Singapore institutions maintaining an exonormative orientation towards the mainland Chinese standard. But unlike the situation in English, Singapore Mandarin is not experiencing a shift towards endonormative stabilization, meaning a rise in acceptance of local norms. And this is due to a few factors, including the accelerating language shift in which English increasingly dominates in Singapore as a home language, meaning that local features of Mandarin are not being transmitted intergenerationally, and also due to an influx of Mandarin teachers from China who are increasingly influential in the educational domain. Some research questions I've been working on regarding Singapore Mandarin include: are Singaporeans who speak English at home but learning Mandarin in school acquiring any of the traditional features of Singapore Mandarin? Second, what attitudes do Singaporeans hold towards local and non-local varieties of Mandarin? And finally, do newcomer children from China who grow up in Singapore end up acquiring any local Mandarin features? What I've found in my work on Mandarin production and attitudes among children is that while certain Singapore Mandarin features are being lost, others with less perceptual salience are still going strong among the younger generation. For example, the pronunciation of the palatal initial xi as si, which is a prevalent local feature, is still used by younger speakers. There's also a large gap in the attitudes of students attending private international schools versus local government schools, with international school students acquiring more mainland-like norms for Mandarin due to the dominance of mainland teachers in those schools. And finally, I wanted to mention that the work I've been doing on language variation and change in Singapore isn't limited to English and Mandarin. I've been compiling data for a multilingual corpus project in which we will examine the complete multilingual repertoires of Singaporeans, including Chinese dialects such as Cantonese and Hokkien, in order to explore how these dialects are being spoken in the local community. Alright, thank you very much for joining me for this talk. To learn more about our PhD program, you can check out this link here, and for more about my own research, you can look at my website. I'm very happy to open up the floor for questions now. Thanks.